When you look at this team,
I just think they found their identity, New York has. And I think there was a stretch in that second quarter where they really blew the game up. What we showed the Anunoby dunk, where good defense turns into really good offense.
The New York Knicks had put themselves in a horrible situation. They dropped Game 2 and Game 3, both by a single point. After that Game 3 loss with the Knicks in a 2-1 series deficit, it really felt like now or never for this version of the New York Knicks. Because this is not some young team with all of the time in the world. They traded for Michael Bridges. They moved off Julius Randle to go and get Karl Anthony Towns. And coming into this season, it was NBA Finals or bust for the New York Knicks. And suddenly they were one more bad night away from this whole thing turning into a disaster. Then the New York Knicks snapped right into place. They win Game 4 114-98. Game 5, they improve on that behind a Bronson masterclass back at MSG. And then in Game 6, back in Atlanta with the Hawks fighting for their playoff lives, the New York Knicks did not just win the series, they straight up embarrassed them. Atlanta even started this game like they did have one more punch left to throw. Will Alexander-Walker hits that corner 3 off the fast break opportunity. Atlanta builds a 9-5 lead, and it looked like New York were in for another scrap of a game. But then the Knicks hit them with a 67-13 run. Yup, you heard me say that correctly. 67-13. By halftime, the score was 83-36, which was the largest halftime lead in NBA playoff history. And the crazy part about it was how quickly it all fell apart for the Hawks. Atlanta went from looking like they might have a little bit of life left to basically being dragged around the floor for the rest of the half. Early turnovers from Atlanta were instantly translating into points for the Knicks. Then New York really started to ramp up their defensive intensity, and the lead quickly ballooned out. This is where the first quarter really began to get ridiculous. Atlanta had made 6 shots and turned the ball over 8 times at quarter time. So they literally had more turnovers than shots made. Meanwhile, New York had 12 assists on 15 makes, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know about the game at that point. By the end of the first quarter, it was 40-15, and I don't care what level of basketball you're talking about. Being up 25 points after one quarter in a close-out game on the road is absolutely wild. Then early in the second quarter, OG Anunoby was literally outscoring the entire Atlanta Hawks team all by himself. 17-5. I mean, this is disgusting. And it wasn't like he was just hijacking the offense or taking a heap of bad shots either. No, the whole Knicks machine was just running perfectly. And OG was in the middle of it early, defending, finishing, making shots, and making every Atlanta possession feel way harder than even the last one. And then the second quarter begins. And somehow, it gets even worse. You've got guys leaking out in transition, different Knicks catching alley-oops, Atlanta throwing away possession after possession, and the timeouts that they're calling weren't changing anything. At some point, you weren't even watching to see the outcome of the game. We were all watching because we could not believe what we were witnessing. Dyson Daniels and Mitchell Robinson get into that fight because there was pretty much nothing left for the Hawks to do. Their season was over, and they knew it. By halftime, an 83-36 lead in the NBA should pretty much be impossible. But it wasn't. This was reality. And even Shaquille O'Neal's halftime efforts to try and save the Hawks did not matter. Their season was dead and buried. What made this game even crazier was how Atlanta actually had real things working in their favor early in the series. This was not some random underdog team just hanging around off of luck. Dyson Daniels had Jalen Brunson in handcuffs for long stretches of this series. CJ McCollum was getting to his spots and straight up being a menace to Jalen Brunson down the other way, going at him time and time again. And then you've got Jonathan Kuminga, who early in the series was awesome for the Hawks off the bench. He was giving them athleticism, rim pressure, physicality, and even some really nice defensive possessions against KAT. All of this really mattered because Atlanta needed this series to be about speed and pressure. And through the first 3 games of the series, it looked like they were doing exactly that, forcing the Knicks into turnovers and giving themselves chances to get out and run. That was why those two one-point losses in games 2 and 3 felt so damning to the Knicks. It wasn't just about the score. It was the way Atlanta was really making the Knicks look bad. Brunson was having to work way too hard. Michael Bridges completely lost confidence. KAT was not being involved anywhere near enough. Head coach Mike Brown was absolutely on the hot seat, and the Hawks were getting the kind of series they wanted. And all of that culminated on the final possession of Game 3, where Jalen Brunson picks hero ball, drives baseline, and throws it away. That right there almost felt like the moment New York lost the series. But after Game 3, the Knicks really locked back in. Game 4 was the correction, winning the game by 16 points, starting to get themselves out in transition, taking away a lot of the easy runouts that Atlanta had too. And they stopped making every possession have to be Brunson wrestling with Dyson Daniels for a whole shot clock. Then, in Game 5, Brunson really found his groove, dropping 39 in a blowout win, firmly snatching a hold of the series. And then by Game 6, all of those early Atlanta pressure points completely evaporated. The pace, the turnovers, and the easy points all of a sudden were actually in New York's favor. And most importantly, the Knicks began to lean into the biggest advantage that Atlanta really had no answer for the whole time: Karl Anthony Towns. Because once Cat started to get the ball in the right spots, this series completely changed, going away from Brunson or bust. And instead, it started to feel like New York were playing with legitimate offensive purpose. And that is why these last 3 games looked so good. The Knicks did not just play harder or make more shots. They actually found a way to bend the series back in their direction. And sure, they probably should have come to this conclusion far earlier, because it was obvious to pretty much everybody watching that Atlanta's biggest player is Inkwell Alexander-Walker, who's 6'8". So maybe, just maybe, you should be using your all-star big man to take advantage of that size mismatch. And yes, it did take Mike Brown being down 2-1 to finally realize what needed to be done. But at least he made the change. This is why they went and got Mike Brown in the first place. Because Tom Thibodeau would have just rode his guys, not made any adjustments, and probably fallen on his sword. Instead, you got Mike Brown, who sure, the changes and adjustments he was making early in the series were definitely the wrong ones, but he eventually stumbled on the right ones. And once the New York Knicks started to treat Karl Anthony Towns like the biggest advantage on the floor, which he clearly was the whole time, the entire feel of the series changed. And this right here is where the story stops being about the Atlanta Hawks. Because if the Knicks are actually going to make a serious title push, that version has to travel series to series. We've seen it clear as day now. The version of the New York Knicks where Jalen Brunson is dribbling the ball for 20 seconds out of a shot clock, everybody else is just standing around watching, and he ends up taking some tough mid-range shot, is just clearly not the version that can win at the highest level. Because against better teams, it cannot just be Brunson dragging the Knicks over the line with ridiculous shot making every game. Sure, he can give you that maybe once or twice in a series, and Game 5 against the Hawks was a great reminder of how dangerous he still is when he gets going. But if New York wants to beat Boston or Philadelphia and push even deeper than that, then the offense needs to look the way it looked in these last 3 games. It just has to keep moving forward. It has to continue to run through Cat way more often, because when Towns is allowed to catch the ball at the top of the floor, the game just becomes so much easier for everybody. That is the biggest thing moving forward. Brunson can come off movement instead of having to start every possession with a defender sitting on his handle. OG can cut, space, defend, and punish teams without ever needing the offense built around them. Bridges can finally stop overthinking and just play off the action. Josh Hart is good enough to keep the ball moving. Mitchell Robinson can come in off the bench and get you extra possessions. And suddenly, the Knicks look less like a Bronson rescue mission and more like a legitimate playoff offense with multiple ways that they can hurt you. Karl Anthony Towns is the key to that, because he's the one who gives this team a different shape. If he's involved, defenses can't just load up on Brunson and wait for the shot clock to run out. They now have to worry about Katz's shooting, passing, posting up a smaller defender, and finding all the cutters going back door. And to be fair to him, the defensive side of the floor really matters too. And in this Atlanta series, he had some genuinely great defensive stretches, blocking shots, playing with a lot of energy, standing up to the physicality, and looking like a legitimate backline presence when New York was letting him roam. Now, that is going to get more difficult against teams like Philadelphia or Boston, just because Atlanta really doesn't have that much size to begin with. But it at least gives the Knicks something real to continue to build on. And it's the swing pieces that really make all of this interesting. OG Anunoby is the easiest guy on the team to trust because his value doesn't depend on touches. In the Atlanta series, he shot well over 50% from 3. And even if that cools off a bit, which it will, he's still going to be out there defending, switching, finishing plays, and making the game super physical. Michael Bridges is going to be the bigger question, but Game 6 at least gave you the version of him that they need. He had 24 points in 27 minutes, shot 10 of 12 from the field, went 2 of 2 from 3, and more importantly, he looked way more decisive, not completely forcing the issue, not standing around doing nothing, just defending, cutting when KAT was in the offensive hub, spacing the floor, making the open shots, and continuing to move the ball. All of this is really going to matter because the next round is where it's all going to be tested yet again. Whether it's Boston or whether it's Philadelphia, the New York Knicks are going to have to continue to play the right way. If the Knicks slip back into their bad habits, it's not going to be good enough. If the ball is sticking too much, if Brunson is having to fight through offensive possessions all by himself, if KAT goes back to disappearing when they really need him, and if they're not getting enough from the role guys, then Boston or Philadelphia are both good enough to punish it. But if the New York Knicks continue to play like a full group, like we saw in the final 3 games of the Atlanta series, then they're actually a group equipped with good enough answers to beat nearly anybody when they're rolling. As it stands right now, I would be picking New York to beat either Boston or Philadelphia. And that's kind of crazy, because coming into these playoffs, I really thought the Boston Celtics were going to win the Eastern Conference. But after seeing how mightily they've struggled against this Sixers team, I'm really not that sure anymore. And with the way New York has completely flipped the script in these last 3 games, all of a sudden I feel like I'm shifting. Because if the Knicks can just carry some of this over, I think they would be too much for either of these teams in round 2. And yes, the New York Knicks are not some perfect team. But when they're playing to their strengths, instead of exposing their weaknesses on their own, they're actually a pretty difficult team to beat. And they're a team that might just be peaking at exactly the right time. But if you want to see how Shai Gilgeous-Alexander might just be about to rewrite NBA history, then you need to go ahead and watch this video right now.